Thanks, Ryan. Dr. Hall is the author of Staying Happy, Being Productive. It's over his right ear there. Fantastic book. He's a clinical psychologist. Um, and I've been working with Dr. Hall for 4 years, or more likely, he's been working with me, helping me learn to think better and make better choices. So I have tremendous respect for Dr. Hall. I've read his books, and what he has to say today. When we first approached him, I was very excited. We were just thinking about COVID and on the news, and then in the last 2 weeks, we had a lot of racial tension in Colorado, and so a lot of the things he's going to say is going to be applicable for just our lives in general and maintaining positive mental health. Dr. Hall, please take it away.
There we go. All right. Well, I'm grateful to be invited. Dan, Ryan, Brett, thank you for having me. All of you who are in attendance here in the Mountain West and folks in California in the far West, grateful to be here. I am a business psychologist. What that means is I come to your office and you lay on your own couch, which is not a very good joke, but I tell it anyway. I want to talk to you today about conquering worry in an age of panic. I have spent the last 2.5 months helping people keep from freaking out, and I hope to help you today. If I can serve, let me know. There's my contact information, and at the end we'll have opportunity to answer some questions. All right, so let's talk about fear. The single back current, undercurrent of everything I've been dealing with now is fear, and it's the most difficult emotion to eliminate. You hear these motivational speakers who say stuff like, live beyond fear. They're lying. You do not want to live beyond fear. You absolutely want fear in your life. Your brain is designed to keep you alive, and you will never eliminate fear. If you've ever seen those pickup trucks that have no fear on the back of their window, you ever notice how they're always in the ditch? Fear are the emotional guardrails that keep us from doing stupid stuff that get us killed. There's a rare inherited condition where people don't experience fear. Do you know why it's a rare inherited condition? Because most people don't make it to reproduction. I mean, we need fear to stay alive. Now, it will preserve your life, so you don't want to get rid of it. There's a problem, though, is that most of the time, the things we're afraid of are not in our world. So what it does is we begin to think about things that we're afraid of and not dealing with what's in our real world. And there's a difference between fear and worry. Fear is present tense, worry is future tense. So what fear does, it takes your brain to the worst case scenario so you can react to the worst case scenario, because that will keep you alive in an urgent crisis emergency state right now. It doesn't do a great job when you're thinking about things that aren't really there. And what happens is it's adaptive if you're fighting a mountain lion to go to the worst case scenario. You're not going to go to, oh, this might be a really nice kitty. It's good to think this animal could kill me with a wildcat. And most of you don't have to, fight or run away from wildcats. But nothing in real life ever goes as badly as our brains can imagine it. So what fear does is it activates a part of your brain called the amygdala that immediately takes over the brain. And so it takes you to the worst case scenario. But in real life, for most of our lives are kind of like Mark Twain's. I'm an old man and have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happened. We can imagine catastrophes, most of which never happen. So worry is not adaptive. Fear you don't want to get rid of. Worry is unproductive. Worry is anticipatory fear. So fear is right now. So if we were all together and I had a grenade and I pulled the pin, popped the handle, and tossed it, you would all be afraid, as well you should be. And it'll evoke in you one of three reactions: fight, flight, or freeze. Anger, anxiety, or apathy. All of those three, fight, flight, or freeze, will happen. And they're all adaptive. Fight, you dive on the grenade, you throw it out the window. Flight, you run out of the room. Or freeze, you kind of faint, fall down, and maybe some piece of furniture protects you. But all of it is present tense. Worry is what you're doing in your head right now, which is, I wonder if I do the right thing. I wonder if he did have a grenade, which I don't. And I wonder if I would do the right thing. And you start to brood on it and percolate on it. And so what it does is it takes your brain to worry. Worry has no productive present tense activity. So what it does is it builds up all the chemistry that fear does, which is adaptive. But worry, there's nothing for you to do. So you sit around and you do nothing, and you stew in all the body chemistry that you get from fear. So adaptive fear impels action. Fight, flight, freeze. I call them anger, anxiety, and apathy. These are the things, the ways I see people responding both to the COVID-19 crisis and the unrest that we've been seeing in our cities. The thing that is really troubling, and I'm sure that you in the wireless community have seen it in terms of sales and in terms of business activity, is freeze. That every animal has the instinct to shut down under intense fear if two things happen. One, they're afraid, and two, they don't think they can escape. And so I see in the business world, and I work only with businesses, entrepreneurs, salespeople, etc. There's been a slowdown in activity because people are freezing. They're afraid and they don't think they can get out of this, so they shut down. And so if you're trying to make sales and nobody's responsive and they tell you, hey, wait till things settle out, it's because they're reacting in fear. Worry, which is anticipatory fear, is malignant planning. It's always a great idea to plan for the future. What happens with worry is you're planning, but you're overcharged emotionally, and so you don't get any productive action. So worry will get you to a physical and mental state where you take no action, that's freeze. You run away from non-dangerous situations. So if we take a practical example, running away from a snake is practical. Running away from a stick that you think is a snake is not practical. So when we worry, we start to run away from situations that won't hurt us. And we fight at the wrong target. We fight with our neighbors, we fight with our spouses, we fight with our kids, we fight with our coworkers, all because we've gotten ourselves hopped up by imagining the worst case scenario. We're in a particular period now, and if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. These are uncertain times. This is a period of unprecedented uncertainty. You hear it all the time. And so I'm going to tell you something about academic psychologists, and you probably think it's true for all psychologists, and it may be. But academic psychologists love electric shock, and they love doing experiments with electric shock. It's like some bad Homer Simpson experiment. And if you watch The Simpsons, you know what I'm talking about. So what they do is they take these college students in, they hook them up to these shock plates. So they strap them down, they put a blood pressure cuff on, a heart rate monitor, and then do what's called a real-time cortisol measure. And cortisol is a stress hormone. It's an anti-inflammatory, and when you're fighting mountain lions, you don't want to get all puffy. So it reduces inflammation, but it's a great measure of how stressed you are. So they put these college students, strap them down to these shock plates, and if you're queasy, nobody gets shocked. It's just, but the students don't know this. So nobody's actually getting shocked here. So they put them there and they say, in 15 minutes, you will receive a painful electric shock. So what do you think happens to their blood pressure? Goes up. Heart rate goes up. Real-time cortisol goes up. That's really clear. Now, with another group of students, they do something slightly different. They tell them a slightly different message, and here's what it is. As they're strapped in, they say, in 15 minutes, you may receive a painful electric shock. Now, here's the quiz, and we don't have a poll for it. It doesn't really matter because I'll tell you the answer. Do you think what happens to their anxiety? Is it lower? Is it the same? No, it's higher. It's higher. So certain future pain is anxiety provoking, but whether or not you might experience future pain is even worse. So when we don't know outcomes, we get freaked out even more than we know if it's going to be bad. And so where we are now is every 15 minutes, the CDC and the World Health Organization changes their guidelines. And in your respective states, the governors and the mayors, every 15 minutes are changing their respective laws and, executive orders. And so we don't know what's going to happen next. And as a result, people are uncertain and therefore freaking out even more. Now, if you're not freaking out at all, but you hate the dentist, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, I worked with dental phobics long time ago in my career, and I asked them, what's the worst part about the dental visit? And they go, the waiting room. And once they're in the chair, they've kind of resigned themselves to the pain. But in the waiting room, they can still escape. So they're uncertain about the future pain. So we're in a period now, because everything is changing, that people are very uncertain. And there's a relationship between fear and control. Fear and control are inextricably linked. So this is a picture of my dog, Connor. He's got a few screws loose. But when I take him for a walk, because he loves to chase squirrels, rabbits, and whistle pigs, and if you don't have whistle pigs in your area, go look it up. What do I take with me? Well, I always take a leash, okay? And so if I'm afraid that he's going to go chasing after a squirrel, I hang on to the leash. Now, when he sees a dog in the back of a pickup truck, he's absolutely convinced space aliens are taking his friend. So he freaks out. So when the pickup truck comes by, what do? I get closer to the collar because I'm pretty sure he's going to freak out. So the more legitimate fear I have, the more control I exert. Now, if you've ever had little children, you've done the same thing when you put those little protective boxes on the outlets. You're afraid your little toddler is going to stick a fork in the outlet, get blown across the room, so you control the outlet. Now, all of that makes sense if you don't want the bad event to occur. But there's this unusual relationship between fear and control, which is the more I hold on to my dog's leash, the more I'm absolutely convinced that what? I need to continue to hold on to my dog's leash. The only way I can eliminate the fear is to, as in this picture, train my dog and let go of the leash. If your kids are 27 years old and you're still afraid they're going to stick a fork in the outlet, you got a control problem. So what we know is that if you want to eliminate fear, you have to release control. Continuing to be in control will only keep you afraid. So it's training, and if you want to develop trust, releasing the control. We see this with obsessive compulsive disorder. People who are obsessive compulsive, obsessions are the fears, compulsions are the behaviors that they do to eliminate the fears. So if I've got this obsession that if I touch a doorknob, I'm going to get COVID-19, so I'm not going to touch a doorknob, and I'm going to wash my hands and put disinfectant on every time, well, what happens then? Well, you start to do this all the time. And I work with people with OCD, and some people would wash their hands as many as 100 times a day. And their hands are raw and they're cracked, and it's a really sad thing. But the treatment is counterintuitive. It's not washing your hands more, because that only increases the fear. It's telling people, touch the doorknob, and then you're allowed to wash your hands, but you gotta wait 20 minutes. So people would be standing there looking at their hands and they're saying, I'm freaking out, I'm freaking out, I'm freaking out. And it's okay, you can wash your hands, but you got 10 more minutes, 5 more minutes. And then you know what happens somewhere between minute 15 and minute 20? Their anxiety spiked and then it went down. And by the time we got to 20 minutes, they're like, you can wash your hands. I think I'm okay. I think this time it'll be okay. They rub them on their jeans, which is surgically clean. But part of the successful treatment is called exposure with response prevention. The only way, if you're afraid of the coronavirus, you're afraid that you're going to get sick, the only way you're going to get over it is to go outside and touch doorknobs and touch things and not die. And frankly, most of you won't. Now, I'm not minimizing the importance of this disease and that people do die of the disease. I absolutely know that. But you need to determine what your acceptable level of risk is, what you're willing to risk. And I can't make that decision for you. But if you want to stay in your house and never go out again until there's a vaccine, they've never created a vaccine for any of the coronaviruses. And so I'm not optimistic that it's going to come out really soon. And, we still don't have a vaccine for AIDS. We have treatments. We have therapies that keep people alive, for which we're thankful, but it's been 40 years. We don't got a vaccine. So if you're waiting for an effective vaccine, you may be waiting a long time in your house, and you need to decide, am I willing to engage the world again? So back to my question is, what can you control? Well, all you can control is what you can pick up and carry. I lost control of my kids when they were 8. Okay, I could no longer at the restaurant, if they're misbehaving, or if we're at Target and they're misbehaving, pick them up under my arm and take them out. I had to then influence them. I had to lead them. So when does a football coach lose control of the play he calls in? As soon as it leaves his mouth. He still has responsibility for the outcome, but he loses control. And most of you in a sales organization, in a sales setting, you don't have a ton of control because you're dependent on your operations people for installs. You're dependent on the customer for their level of anxiety. There's very little you can control. And when we can't control things, we shift to information gathering or prediction. And I love to watch people out in public. And so if it's not as common here in the Mountain West, but if you're in California, if there you are, or actually in Denver, you have it as well. If you're waiting for a train, I would encourage you to watch people on the platforms. So there's only 2 places people look when they're waiting for a train. One is at their phone, and the other is down the track. And I have watched people look down the track because nobody has control on when the train comes, but we all want to predict it. They look down the track. I've seen people look down the track for 5 minutes to gain an 8-second advantage over the guy looking at his phone. Because the guy looking down the track for 5 minutes, he sees it first, and then the guy looking at his phone hears it 8 seconds later. So what it teaches us is we will expend a tremendous amount of time and energy to predict things that we don't control. So if you're bidding on a job and you don't have control on the outcome, guess what your customer is going to do? Your customer is going to pepper you for information. Give me information, because they're freaking out. They want to predict what will happen. My favorite example of this is the Weather Channel. The Weather Channel has revenues of $350 million a year to give me information I can get by looking out my window. Okay? Because they're going to tell me in advance of when I look out my window what the weather is going to be. And so we'll spend an incredible amount of time and an incredible amount of money in order to predict what will happen next if we don't control it. Now, in the coronavirus, and with the unrest that we're having now, where do we turn? We turn to the TV. So here's my moral of the story. If you get it for free, you are not the customer, you are the product. So when you're watching the television, I know it's cable, but you're getting that broadcasting for free, okay? Who's the customer? The customer is the advertiser. The advertiser is paying to put that out there, and you're getting that entertainment for free because the advertisers know their audience. So if you're watching football, what are the commercials? I've asked this to hundreds and hundreds of people. Here are the commercials: beer, pickup trucks, pizza or wings, and Viagra. They know their audience. They're men who like pickup trucks, beer, bad food, and sex. They know that. If you're watching the Hallmark Channel, what are the ads for? Cat litter, cat food. I'm not saying anymore, but you know I'm right. Okay? Now, if you're watching the news, what are the commercials on the news? They're for gold, they're for insurance, and they're for prescription medicines to treat stress-related illnesses. Watch and see. Nobody watches the news to be calmed down, and the advertisers know that. They know you watch the news, you leave feeling sick to your stomach, so you take a Tums. You start to get anxious, so you take an anti-anxiety. Your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, so you take your blood pressure medicine. So the news sees you as the product, and you keep drinking it in. And the more you put that information in your mind, the more it's like the junk drawer in your kitchen. Now, every well-adjusted person has a junk drawer in their kitchen. If you don't, give me a call, I'll help you out. But every well-adjusted person has it. And everybody knows what's in the junk drawer. On the top of the junk drawer is the thing that you use the most, the thing that you recently took out and threw in the top, or the thing that comes in and out all the time. So for me, it's pens, it's scissors, it's Post-it notes, right? What's in the back of the junk drawer? I have absolutely no idea. I've never been there for the last 2 years. Okay, and your junk drawer is just like that. Well, I make it my goal to insult everybody in every audience that I speak to. Your brain, your mind is like the junk drawer. Whatever you put in recently or frequently comes out the most. Comes out the most often. It's called priming. That's the psychological term. Then that's coupled with this second piece, which is called the availability heuristic, which comes from work from Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. He and Amos Tversky came up with this idea back in the 1970s. You don't have to read the book. But if you're also a normal, well-adjusted person, at some point in your life, you played slug bug, or in some areas of the country, punch buggy. And if you didn't, ask a friend, go talk to a counselor because you've lived a bad life. So here's, for those of you who don't know, who are not well-adjusted, here's how it works. You're driving down the street and somebody in the car sees a Volkswagen Beetle, at which point they say as loud as they can, slug bug, and in some areas, the color. So in this case, it'd be slug bug blue, which gives the yeller the divine right to reach over and punch whoever's in the car with him. Now, if you've ever played this game, every time you're driving down the road, even if you're in the car by yourself, you see a Volkswagen Beetle, what do? You're waiting to get punched because you've done this. So what this does is it makes Volkswagen Beetles be seen everywhere. You're primed. Volkswagen Beetles are on the top of your junk drawer. And the availability heuristic teaches us that if it's easy to retrieve from the junk drawer of our memory, we see it as representative of the whole or more frequent. In other words, we'll overestimate the frequency with which we believe Volkswagen Beetles are on the road. Now, if you've never played this game, you know it's true because whatever car you drive or whatever car you're currently lusting after, you see them everywhere. That's how the availability heuristic works. So we overestimate the frequency. Now, here's the interesting thing and how it relates to the news. They've done studies with people who watch the local news and people who don't watch the local news. Who has the higher estimates of crime? Obviously, the people who watch the local news. Who's more accurate? The people who don't watch the local news. Because if it bleeds, it leads. People who watch the local news, it's easily available, all this bad stuff happening. Okay, people who don't watch the local news, they look out their window and they go, I don't know, seems pretty good in my neighborhood. And they're more accurate because base rates of crime are relatively low. Most people don't have crime in their backyard. Now, here's how it relates to the coronavirus and the unrest that we've been having. The more you watch the news, the more you're going to say that the coronavirus and the unrest is going to affect you, that it has killed more people than it actually has, and the unrest is perpetrated by more people than are actually doing it. So we overestimate the frequency of the bad. Now, when we overestimate the frequency of the bad, and we're absolutely convinced that we're going to die from the coronavirus, that activates a part of our brain called the amygdala. And that will keep us alive when we're dealing with a wild cat in the woods. So let's say it's a beautiful day like today, you're walking out in the woods, and because you're in love, you're writing a love poem to your beloved. And because you're working out, income's a little different now because of the coronavirus, you're doing some long division, right? And then you see a wildcat. So let me ask you, as you start running away from the wildcat, are you able to come up with that rhyme? No. Are you able to do long division? No, because that part of your brain is not necessary for running away from a wildcat. But when you worry and get hopped up by watching negative news, it puts it on the top of your junk drawer, you overestimate its frequency, it makes the amygdala, which are these deep structures, one's about right here, and one's right about here, shut down the prefrontal. This is the logical part of your brain that solves problems and makes rhymes and does long division. This part turns off. So as you're running from a wildcat, you don't need that. But to solve the problems that we're dealing with today, you absolutely need your prefrontal cortex. It's called a limbic hijacking. So our amygdala shuts down the prefrontal because it's faster and prevents us from being able to solve our problem with our thinking. So we can't alleviate our anxiety because we can't figure out a way to solve our problem. So I see people freaking out because they can't ever come up with a solution to their problem. When in fear, we imagine the worst case scenario, but don't factor in that there are other people managing this to keep the worst case scenario from happening. We forget that we can solve the problem, and if we can't, other people can and do. We assume the worst as those events that are easy to imagine, and the more the news reports it, the easier it is to imagine, and the more we overestimate its frequency. We misapprehend our risks. So let me give you an example. What way are you most likely to die at the beach? Now, if you were all here, you would say things like shark attack, especially if Shark Week was just on Discovery Channel. You would say sunstroke, jellyfish bite, drowning. That's a good one. Do you want to know the most likely way you are to die at the beach? Heart disease, because that's the way you're most likely to die anywhere. Do you see what I just did? I put the beach by putting this picture on the top of your junk drawer. And I asked you to imagine what are the ways most likely that you'll die at the beach. And most of you came up with beach-related, ocean-related examples, but you failed to see the base rate, which is heart disease. You're most likely to die of heart disease at the beach. So we misapprehend our risks all the time. If you're a rock climber, you're engaged in a risky activity. Well, maybe not so bad as you think. 1 out of 320,000 climbs ends in a fatality. 1 out of 320,000 climbs ends in a fatality. So a lot of you are saying, I'm never going to go rock climbing. That's crazy. And those of you in California say, well, I'm never going to, Alabama Hills. And those of you in Nevada, I'm not going to Red Rocks. And in Arizona, I'm not going to Flag anymore because I could die, because it's easy to imagine. But look at the next statistic. Canoeing is only half as dangerous. And I guarantee everyone in this audience has gone canoeing, and half of this audience has gone canoeing while intoxicated. But none of you think it's dangerous. Well, it's only half as dangerous as rock climbing, but we'll do it all the time, and many of you have done it drunk. And here's the next one. Fairground rides. Most of you go, man, fairground rides, I'm not going to ride on those because those were probably put together last Saturday by some toothless carny. I'm not doing it. Look at the numbers here. You are 116 times more likely to die canoeing than from a fairground ride, because it's easier to imagine getting shot out of the tilt-a-whirl and splatting against the Dumbo Ears concessionaire than it is to think that you're going to die from a canoe. So because it's easy to imagine, we overestimate its probability. The same is true if you're spending all of your time watching the news, you're freaking out, and you don't need to, because as clear as the risk is, there is a risk. I'm not saying there isn't a risk, but there are lots of other dangerous things in the world. So how do you get over this? You turn worry and panic into productive planning. When you're calm, plan out a solution, prepare, bring all the materials in that you need. So this is an example. I use this picture because back in 2000, I had a conversation with a Vietnam era vet, 3 tours of duty, combat duty. And I asked him, and so it's about 3.5, 4 years in the field. I asked him, what was your service weapon? He said an M16. And I said, in the year 2000, I said, when was the last time you touched one? He said, 1975, when I got on the helicopter out of the field, I put it in the rack, never touched it again, have never touched another one. And I said, just out of curiosity, 25 years later, do you think you could field strip this? He said, absolutely, with my eyes closed, wearing mittens. To which his wife said, oh, no, you couldn't. And he said, yeah, I could, because it was a new weapon system at the time. It was prone to jamming. So I disassembled, I field stripped my rifle 12 times a day. Because the last thing you want in combat is a gun that doesn't go bang. So if you do the math, 12 times every day for 3.5, 4 years, you've got about 10,000 times he's disassembled his gun. So 25 years later, from practice, he could still do it. You want to get over worry, you want to be productive, you've got to practice in calm times. So grab your paper and pen. We're rounding the bases and headed for home. Fear is good, worry is the problem. Worry is malignant planning. The next time you see a soldier, remember that practice is what allows you to perform well under stress. The next time you open your junk drawer, remind yourself, the mind is like a junk drawer. What am I putting in it? Am I putting in the news? The next time you see a Volkswagen Beetle, you can play slug bug if you want, but remember that we overestimate what comes easily to mind. And the next time you're in a canoe or at the fair or at the beach, remind yourself how easy it is to misapprehend our risks. The next time you're in the waiting room at the dentist, remind yourself that uncertainty is worse than certain pain. Next time you see a wildcat, hopefully not in real life, remember that the part of your brain that makes you run away keeps you from solving most of your problems. The next time you see someone walking a dog, remind yourself, take reasonable precautions, a leash, but in order to trust, you have to let go of the leash. Next time you're waiting for a train, watch where people are looking. And remember, we spend inordinate amounts of time seeking information that doesn't give us much advantage. So limit your information gathering. Choose sources that have no financial investment in sharing that information. They're more likely to be accurate. Monitor how that information gathering makes you feel. And if it makes you worry with no solution, it's not helpful. If it helps you come up with a solution, rock on. And remember, reporters are prone to the same biases that you are. Get information from more than one source. And that's all I got to say about that. Thank you for having me. I think we can open it up for questions.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Hall. That was really helpful, very timely, obviously. We do have, if you have any questions, again, go down to the bottom of your screen and click on the Q&A, and you can type those out. We'll pass those along to Dr. Hall and make sure we get those answered. I do have a couple of other questions here. Let me pull them up. Let's see what we have. I'm trying to find them. There we go. First question somebody has is, what's your advice to handle the news? It seems to be a little, it seems to be read a little, but then turn it off to maintain mental health. So I think the question is it good just to get enough to get the info you need and then turn it off versus absorbing it and over soaking it in? I think that was the question.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So the way I approach the news is I don't watch television news anymore. For me, it takes up way too much time. I stopped watching the news in 1994 when they were reporting on the Rwandan genocide, and they're showing people get hacked up with machetes. And I thought, I don't need to see this. So I haven't watched the news since then. But what I do is I look at the headlines. And in the morning, I spend maybe 10 minutes looking at the headlines. And sometimes in the middle of the day, I'll look at the headlines for no more than 10 minutes. And in the evening, about 10 minutes. But I don't spend, and sometimes I don't even look at it that much. I let people say, hey, did you hear about? And I say, no, why don't you tell me? And, they feel important. I get the information, and I've saved myself, an hour a day since 1994. So 10 minutes, 20 minutes a day is more than enough to know what's going on and be well informed. Great question.
All right, good, thanks. Let's see, next question. What advice do you have for people dealing with fearful and controlling people?
So controlling people, if you've ever had a micromanaging boss or a controlling person in your life, the thing I encourage people to do is think, okay, this person is controlling because they're afraid of something. So if you ask them or study, what is it about them that they're afraid of? It may be that they're going to be embarrassed, or that they're going to lose their job, or that they'll be looked on badly. Whatever it is, work to alleviate the fear. So understand what they're afraid of and then work to alleviate that. That's for controlling people. With fearful people, it really is about helping them express that fear, joining with them, and then soothing them. So you've got to get a person calmed down before you can redirect them. Okay, so you can't just say, you're crazy, you snap out of it. That won't do it. You've got to calm them down. Why? Because you've got to get the amygdala not firing. So once they get calmed down, you got, honey talk them, sweet talk them, get them soothed down. The amygdala closes down, the prefrontal comes back online, and they can finally listen to you. If you're arguing with a person who's afraid, they're going to continue to be more afraid. So those honey tones, that soothing talk to tamp down the amygdala, then you can get the prefrontal back online. Great question.
All right, good. Let's see, one that just came in. Are you familiar with the book Building a Second Brain? And if so, do you recommend it or not, and why?
I am not familiar with it, but always glad to get a new recommendation. If you want to learn about the brain, there's a book called The Emotional Life of Your Brain. If you want to get at brain biology, there is The Brain That Changes Itself is a great book. Gosh, there's so many great brain books. Daniel Amen has done a lot. Here's one from him. Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. So there are a lot of really great books that'll help you do this. If you want to, I think I gave that away. There's a great workbook that if you want to manage your thinking called Mind Over Mood. And I think I gave it away. I haven't bought a new one. But it's called Mind Over Mood. That's a great kind of workbook to help you gather and collect your thoughts and overcome fears. Great question.
I have a question, and it comes from the standpoint of not knowing what you don't know, right? There's four things in our world. There's things we know, things we don't know, things we don't know, and there's the one of things I don't know. So
Yes.
from that perspective, how can I learn how to identify when there's fear entering my life and I don't know it's entering my life? How can I be more aware of identifying this opportunity to improve myself around fear and how I deal with it?
That's a great question. So I'm going to show you something. You see this? I've never seen that without assistance, but everybody I know has seen that. I'm bald back there. Okay. I need somebody to tell me that I'm bald. Okay. So the same is true with the things you don't know that you don't know. Someone else has to tell you. And you hope they'll tell you in a gentle way, like, dude, you're bald. I mean, it's not very nice, but so what you want to do is have someone else say, hey, have you thought about this? And so a friend, a trusted advisor, all of those are great.
Great. All right. Well, that's all the questions we have. So this has been awesome. It's been great for me. I think obviously the timing has been impeccable. So thanks for your time. And